Parents, have you noticed that lately it seems like your whole family is both wound up and worn out? Have you noticed that everyone seems to be exhausted, burnt out, or over the top emotional? Well, especially if you have school-aged kids, you know that schedules are busier than ever. You have sports, you have school, you have activities, you have your own work, you have your own schedules. There just seems like there can't be any more room to fit anything else on our plates. And what this leaves us with is it leaves us with both wound up and eventually then worn out and exhausted. So if this sounds like your family, this is a must-watch video as we talk about the 3 progressive stages of subluxation and nervous system dysregulation. This happens when our nervous system gets stuck on fight or flight and becomes disorganized and dysfunctional and eventually worn out and exhausted. So let's talk about the science and what it takes to get wound up and then eventually worn out, and then a few things you can do to try to help your body recover from this sympathetic dominant state. So step 1 is the basics of subluxation or nervous system dysregulation. And so this is really saying that we have focused on so many different things for our health. We've focused on our diet, we've focused on certain supplements, on exercise. There's all these things we're trying to prioritize, but the number one thing that impacts all of these things that can often be overlooked and is the number one thing impacting everybody in your family is nervous system dysregulation. And so this is when the nervous system becomes imbalanced, we have this fight or flight or sympathetic state, and then we have parasympathetic, which is rest and digest, and oftentimes this scale gets imbalanced. And so nervous system dysregulation is when we don't have balance. We're supposed to fight or flight, we're supposed to have stress, there are healthy forms of stress, and then we're supposed to rest, digest, repair, recover, regulate. And so we're really supposed to see this imbalance versus skewing either sympathetic dominant, or when we skew parasympathetic dominant, that's burnout. So this is when we have this dysregulation, or we have a miscommunication or interference with the communication with the brain and the body. In chiropractic, we call that a subluxation. And so how do kids become stressed out? We talk a lot about traumas, thoughts, and toxins. And so this is for kids and for adults, but we'll talk about the 3 forms of stress. So what are things that contribute to this imbalance? So we have physical stress, which is slips, falls, accidents, or physical exercise. So that would be a good form of physical stress. You are supposed to put a physical demand on your body, and then your body will rest and recover and repair. And especially if you've worked out and you've achieved health goals in working out and strength, you know that it is as important, if not more important, to have a rest day as it is to have a day where you push yourself in the gym. And that's because the actual repair of the muscle tissue and of the muscle fibers that strengthens the muscles happens on the rest day. So we break the muscle down on the workout day, and we repair and we build up stronger on the rest day. And so that would be a good form of stress, but slips, falls, accidents, or long-term posture are other forms of physical stress that continue to just build on our body. So physical stress gets stored physically, and that's one way our body can shift over to the stress. Then we have mental and emotional stress. Mental and emotional stress is something that we commonly, when we say the word stress, that's the first form of stress we think of, is more mental and emotional stress. And in today's society, a lot of it comes from the fact that our schedules are so busy, we constantly try to push ourselves so far, and we only have so much in the tank, and we don't recharge the battery, and we need to continue to produce from the battery, and therefore that comes from this high anxiety, exhaustion. We're just continuing to produce as much as possible. And then the third form of stress is environmental stress. And this is anything our body is exposed to, our body has to filter. Our body filters through our skin, our lungs, our liver, our kidneys, and our digestive tract. And so our body is designed to filter these things, but the higher the stressful or toxic load on the body, the more stress. And so all of these things together shift this scale imbalanced. And so those are some of the things on how your nervous system would get dysregulated. So what happens is when our body is exposed to a stressor, it signals this alarm in our brain. It's like a fire alarm, and it says danger, 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 or potential danger. And so when that happens, there's the cascade of reactions that happen. And this is specifically called your HPA axis, or your hypothalamic pituitary adrenal cortex axis. And this is the brain's signal to the body to stimulate cortisol. Cortisol is your stress hormone. Now, when cortisol is produced, cortisol goes to the body, and this is when we hit fight or flight. This is when we say, if we had potential danger, if we had a tiger chasing us or a bear, our body would say, let's kick on, let's get fast glucose, let's turn off any, unnecessary or healing properties that are taking place right now. We need to run. And that's amazing. It's amazing what our bodies can do. When we need our bodies to perform in an instance, your body can perform. And this is like, maybe if you were ever in college and you tried to pull an all-nighter to study for a big exam and you pushed. Maybe you're an athlete and you had a big game and your body said, let's turn on, let's perform. And so all of those things are great. Those are modern examples of us running from a bear, because obviously there's not many bears chasing us in a modern society. But there are these bear-like situations where we have these other things that seem as life-threatening as if we were running from a bear. And so the initial response, we kick on, we perform, our body says, I've got this, I can stimulate, I can access that next level. And then what would happen is if you were running from the bear, then when the danger was no longer present, you would rest, you would recover, you would take a nap, you would calm down, your heart rate would then speed up. You'd start noticing the physical effects of the exhaustion of running. Because if you were exhausted while you were running from the bear, then that would be bad because it would deplete your ability to run from the bear. So we run, we push, and then when we rest, when we calm down, the exhaustion sets in, our body sends out all of our processes to start repairing and recovering from the exercise or the stress or the performance we just went through. So this is when then the stress response inherently would be good, and then we would rest. Now, this stress and cortisol are often, tied into this negative context. And inherently, they're not negative. And I use the physical stress as an example a lot because exercise inherently is good for you. It's when exercise has been done too much or we have stress for too long that it starts to become a problem. And so same with mental and emotional stress. If we have a mental and emotional stress that kicks on, it gets us through a stressful time period, and then we recover. But what happens is this signal in our brain, because our modern stressors are no longer running from a tiger or running from a bear, our signal in our brain starts going off all the time. And it's our calendar, it's our phone notifications, it's people expecting stuff from us at work, it's work deadlines, it's kids needing demands, it's lack of sleep that then continues to culminate into wearing you down, while simultaneously we're trying to run from the tiger, we're trying to run from the tiger, we're trying to run from the tiger. And this leads to what's called sympathetic dominance. This is when the fire alarm of stress never turns off. And in a modern world, especially with technology, with busy lifestyles, and with everything, we have all of these signs of stress our body is reading. And it's our inability to turn that off and really tune into the parasympathetic rest, digest, and recover that becomes the problem, because our body has to recover. And so when we've accessed the sympathetic overdrive, and now we're stuck, our fire alarm's just going all the time, we have high anxiety, we're starting to see physical symptoms because our body is so wound up at this point. And so what happens is this initial cortisol response that actually can be good in some ways has now turned off other processes, because when we're producing hormones communicate very intricately with each other to say, this stimulates this. When this is too high, we downregulate this. When this is too low, we upregulate this, etc. So we have this HPA axis. We're producing cortisol. Because the adrenal glands are focusing on cortisol, we're downregulating other non-essential hormones, or non-essential for that moment. Because if you're running from a tiger, you're going to downregulate things like sex hormones, you're going to downregulate resting and repairing. And so we're downregulating all of these things that would be, quote, non-essential for survival, while we're just focused on the production of this cortisol. So now we're at a point, we've sympathetic overdrive, we always have the fire alarm, our body is only producing cortisol, and we're starting to see these other things be impacted by this long-term stress response. And so this is when we start to notice what's called neurological soft signs, or we start to notice difficulty with basic health functions like sleeping, digestion, immune health, and social emotional regulation. We have a very difficult time sleeping, we get low quality sleep or have a hard time falling asleep. Our digestion is really impacted. We either have bloating or a lot of GI issues. Our immune system is much more susceptible because our immune system is going to be compromised. And social and emotional, we can be really moody, we can be really irritable, we can have a difficult time regulating when we need to regulate. All of those things because the body is saying, fire alarm, fire alarm, fire alarm. And these basic health functions are not going to get the support that they need. So that's when we start to notice all of these things are imbalanced. So what's stage 2? Now we have the fire alarm going off. We're starting to notice some things in our own function, saying, hey, maybe my body is not performing. So what do I need to do? So once this is start to set in, over time, we start to see stage 2. Now, stage 2 becomes disorganization and dysregulation. And so this is when we start to see in kiddos who are supposed to be focusing on milestones and growth and development, when they're shifted into this sympathetic dominance, you can't be in growth and protection at the same time. So when they're shifted, we start to notice neurological a delay in their neurological milestones. And so that's one of the things we start to notice quickly in kiddos, but in adults, we can either see motor and coordination issues, we can see that in kids, we can see a difficulty maybe with vertigo, etc. We start to see where our balance in our nervous system is disorganized. So in our office at Sun Life Chiropractic, we would do a scan, specifically what's called an SEMG, where we look at muscle activity and where our body is using the most activity for different areas. And we would notice that the balance between the amount of tension throughout the whole body is imbalanced. And so instead of evenly distributing or using the same amount of energy throughout, will be really imbalanced. We'll have a primary area with a lot of energy. We'll have other areas where our muscles have just become fatigued. And so one area, particularly your neck or your shoulders, might be using a ton of energy, or those muscles are really activated. And potentially in like your mid to lower back, we start to see fatigue, or these muscles have essentially gone offline. And so it's this disorganization in communication between the brain and the body, where we have some areas that are too tight, some that are not online enough, and the brain and the body, the communication is just disorganized. It doesn't know, do we rest, do we stimulate, do we this, do we that? Confusion. Another thing we see is we'll start to see one side versus the other side. So whether it might be imbalanced throughout the spine, and then we might see more tension on the left side, more tension on the right side, and that in kiddos can be a lot of the balance and coordination, and they can be kind of falling to one side because we have so much energy pulled to this one side. And so that's also an imbalance. We want balance and communication between the brain and the body from both sides to go to also both sides of the brain. And that can also even alter motor tone and with coordination, because if we're primarily using one side of the body, or we're hypertonic on one side, we might have low tone on the opposite side. And so those are some of the things we can see in kids, but also in adults. And so this is this disorganized or dysregulated phase. And so now the brain is confused. We have too many signals, and we have incongruency in these signals, and the brain is disorganized. Now, the third phase after disorganization becomes neurological exhaustion. This is when we've gone from wound up to burnt out. And so this is when our body and becomes things like deeper issues like thyroid issues, metabolic syndrome, adrenal fatigue, and this is when we see hormone issues, etc. And so this is when our body is showing signs of having been dysregulated for too long, and now we're seeing deeper signs of what this imbalance has caused. And this oftentimes feels like you are trying to perform, or you're trying to go, and it feels like the parking brake is stuck on. So I'm trying to drive a car and the parking brake is stuck on. Like, I am trying to perform, I am trying to do what I need to do, but it feels like there's resistance, or there's, sandbags tied to your ankles. It feels like there is resistance. And this is when we're trying to keep the same level of when our body said, okay, let's run from the tiger, let's run from the bear. And we've been burning and burning and burning and burning, that now we've gotten to this exhaustion where it's like, I can't shift into next gear because I have not gotten enough time to recharge. We've also used the analogy in our office before of charging a cell phone. And so we're all very familiar with what it looks like to have battery power in your technology. And so when our phones are on full battery, they're in optimal performing mode. And so there's battery there, they're running smoothly, etc. And then you get to a phase of low battery mode. And so it will, even if you have an iPhone, it will say, would you like to go into low power mode? Now, low power mode shifts off non-essential processes so that it can conserve battery. And that way it is only using what it needs to perform as a basic functions. And so you might also notice it starts to run a little slower, or other things aren't performing, and it's running low, and I need to go plug this in, I need to go charge this. So what's happening is our bodies have gotten into low power mode, and we've shut off non-essential processes. And so now we're only using things for the essentials. And so we've noticed on the hormone cascade, we've noticed the physical signs of what is that's impacting in our body for it to do that. We're in low battery mode, and we're trying to then perform at the same level. When our bodies are saying, we need to be plugged back in, we need to charge, and our bodies do that by rest. Resting is how our bodies charge. So we see this way too often, and we even see this as a pediatric and prenatal office, we see this in kiddos who are really already at this burnt out, exhausted state, and they're young. And this is because of trauma, thoughts, and toxins, or physical stress, environmental stress, and mental and emotional stress from birth that has just accumulated, and their body has been trying to adapt, and eventually it becomes exhausted because it lacks the bandwidth to keep up. Because the stress in the bucket, the amount of stress pouring in is exceeding how much we're draining that bucket or adding support or balancing that stress response. And that's when you get to physical symptoms. Physical symptoms are always the tip of the iceberg, where the stress has built, the exhaustion has worn in, and now we're getting to the tip of the iceberg and we see physical symptoms. And so it's sad because, especially for young kiddos, you can see this physical response or the symptoms start to pop up that are really a product of this long-term stress exposure. Now, where do we go from here? So we understand how we got here. We understand what that feels like. We understand where we're at. So where do we go? And the good news is, as neurological chiropractors, this is something we focus on. So we focus on eliminating subluxation and adding balance back into the nervous system. We do so through neurologically focused chiropractic adjustments. So specifically to give your body space and time to push that brake pedal or to rest and recharge. It also helps bring organization back to the body and rest and recharge. But there are other ways too that you can continue to pour into this brake pedal. Things like proper sleep, things like grounding and meditation. But to get a deeper level, neurological focused chiropractic care actually stimulates the brain when we get adjusted. And so it's so neat that we can actually send signals straight to the brain through the adjustment. And so getting adjusted by a neurologically focused chiropractor, and then also in turn getting proper sleep, proper hydration, and stress management techniques, and we can start to bring balance back into your body. And it's amazing when we get the body unstuck and we get it out of this state, this sympathetic dominance, how truly that's where healing can start. So go ahead and check us out at sunlifechiropractic.com. We'd love to get you scanned so we can see where exactly your nervous system's at and get you a proper customized care plan to set you up for success. Look forward to seeing you there.